morning, good morning. Welcome to The Big Questions, live from Michelson Community College in Cardiff. I'm Nicky Campbell. The UK is now the fattest country in Europe. 1/4 of British adults are clinically obese, 1/3 actually here in Wales, and more worryingly, 1/3 of British children are overweight or obese by the time they leave primary school. So, another flurry of groups and campaigns is launched in the last fortnight to do something about it. And one idea is to tax unhealthy foods. Our first big question, should we tax to tackle obesity? This gastroenterologist says obesity is now such a huge burden on the National Health Service, we should tax all fattening foods containing sugar. This health campaigner says tax is too blunt an instrument and the food industry would soon find ways to avoid it. Some people believe in ghosts, some think horoscopes are a guide to life, others trust homeopathic remedies. Well, these people have faith in their beliefs, whatever scientists or researchers might discover about them through testing or meticulous observation. Our next big question, is faith compatible with reason? Author Robert Griffith says human progress needs us to unravel mystery, not revel in it. And past life regression therapist Andrea Folks says her heart tells her what is real and true. She doesn't need scientific proof. And this week's report into Mid Staffordshire NHS Trust concluded that appalling care flourished because managers put corporate self-interest and cost control ahead of patients and their safety. But this risk is not confined to one hospital. Across the health service, doctors and nurses have raised serious concerns about the Liverpool Care Pathway. It's a protocol designed to ensure a good death in every hospital. Our last big question, is the NHS cutting lives short? This hospital consultant says the Liverpool Care Pathway has become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Many people may die too soon only because they've been put on it. And this palliative care specialist says people are only put on it when there's a 97% likelihood the patient will die within the next 48 hours. It does not cause deaths, it aims to ease dying. Welcome everybody to The Big Questions. Well, today, the average 10-year-old boy living here in Wales, where we are this morning, is 10 kilograms or 1 stone 8 pounds heavier than his counterpart 10 years ago. This is the first generation of children who are not expected to live as long as their parents. Obesity already costs the NHS £6 billion a year, a figure that's forecast to balloon to £50 billion by 2050. It's linked to arthritis, liver disease, cancers, asthma, gallstones, heart problems, 300 separate conditions in all. Should we tax to tackle obesity? Zoe Harcombe, you've written this book, The Obesity Epidemic. Do you, I mean, you talk about insidious sugar.
Yes.
That's the great Satan of food, is it,
Yeah.
as far as you're concerned?
Yeah. I do believe we should tax, and I believe we have to get the right tax. So we must not tax anything that is real food or a component of real food. So people often put three things together, the holy grail as it were, fat, sugar and salt. Two of those are wrong. Fat and salt are real foods, found in real foods. We need more of both of them, ironically. Sugar is the demon. We had a sugar tax until 1874. We just need to bring it back in. And it needs to be punitive. It needs to be such that it acts as a deterrent.
Punitive and prohibitive?
Yeah, absolutely. As you said at the top of the programme, we have to do something. Foresight report said that 90% of 2007's children will be overweight or obese by 2050 unless we do something. We have to do something serious. Sustain called last week for 20 pence per litre on sugary drinks. I would go much further. Anything that contains a gram of sugar or sweetener, because the food industry will only swap one with the other, tax it, double the price of that product. Bag of sweets should cost nearer £20 than £1. We've got to price...
Bag of sweets, 20 quid?
Absolutely. This is like smoking. We have got to price this out of people's range.
Fatima,
Right.
20 quid for a bag of sweets?
Having lived fat for so many years, I have learned the hard way that to lose weight, you shouldn't eat any of these things. So if you tax them, you are, to get rid of obesity, with fat people, it's not going to work. If sugar is bad, so it's bad for everybody, for the thin, and for the fat people. So let's not take obesity as an excuse, because the more we talk about fat people, the more we demonize fat people, the more obesity is on the rise.
Do you think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy then, because people who might eat because of certain insecurities, their insecurities are exacerbated, so then they eat more?
There are so many reasons for people to be fat. And then there are other conditions here, health conditions like candida overgrowth that gets people to want to eat sugary foods, thin and fat. So why blame fat people all the time?
This is not demonising fat people at all. It's not at all. I have every sympathy with you. This is demonising the food industry.
It's not me. I deal with thousands and thousands of people who are fat, and the only thing they want is to lose weight.
Absolutely.
I don't think any fat person alive, especially women, with all the shame, with all the humiliation, with all the ostracization, and
it's a difficult word to say, ostracization. But what's wrong, Fatima, with making sure that the food that is killing people and cutting lives short is more expensive than the food that is actually good for you? What's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong. Ban it. Ban it. If it's bad for the fat, it's bad for the thin.
I'd go there.
Yeah.
Ban it, even better. Yeah. Don't tax it, ban it.
Well, food writer, Oliver.
I agree with Zoe. I think sugar is far more dangerous than fat. I think a good way of doing things might be to, by all means, levy a sugar tax on things like fizzy drinks, but then offset that with subsidies for
healthy
fruit and vegetables and pulses and whole grains. I think that would be a good way of doing things.
And with the stigma that we've had as fat people, we get the worst jobs, so we are worse off. You know, you see insults everywhere. We can't be superstars or film stars or anything. I mean, the fat is being humiliated and insulted. I don't think anyone in their right mind.
So how do we then
fat.
stop children getting fat in the first place, Dr. Haboubi? Because Fatima's right. This will increase life chances of children. It will include their health and well-being. We are what we eat. Educational attainment. It will, if we do something radical, lead to a fairer society. What do we need to do?
I think the danger here that we're focusing on food. Obesity is never just simply create excessive calorie consumption on its own. Obesity is much more multifactorial. I personally think that the whole society has become so sedentary, and it is that reason why obesity has become so more prevalent.
I disagree. I think this is what the food industry wants us to be.
He's saying it's laziness. You're saying it's sugar.
It's not. It's not laziness. The food industry wants to believe we are too sedentary. That is their key message. They want to tell us, eat all of our products, eat more of our products, eat as much sugar, fizzy drinks as you can possibly get in your mouth, but exercise it off, you lazy so-and-sos.
Well,
that's their message.
Dr. Haboubi is from the National Obesity Forum.
Yeah.
Right.
Of course.
What?
I mean, you
don't like the National Obesity Forum?
I like everybody. I really do.
Some less than others.
No, I mean, we have a big heart as our beautiful big bodies. You gentlemen, and your company or your association and your movement with the diet industry and everybody are trying to eradicate fat completely. Anyone who is fat is diseased, which is not true.
Well, obesity is a disease.
It isn't a disease.
It is a disease.
It is not, doctor. It is not for everybody. All the diseases that you find in fat people, you find in thin people. Diabetes, high blood pressure, cholesterol, all sorts of I mean, show me a disease that is only for fat people and thin people don't have. Where?
Your risk is much higher of those things.
That's what they say.
What we need to come back to is that we have a finite budget. We have a finite budget to spend on disease in this country. The NHS, only has a certain amount to spend, and the government has a duty of care to ensure that it has the best resources available for us all. So the emphasis needs to be on prevention. And I think I agree with a lot of what's been said already, but we don't know. Most people don't know what is healthy food anymore. So I think we need to do some quite radical things around banning the word healthy on most products because they're not healthy. We need to have intelligent... Well, you know, there are all sorts of things which will call themselves healthy because they've got a few oats in, you know, but the fact they've got 30 grams of sugar as well is ignored. So we need to have intelligent food labelling. The current, the traffic light system demonises really important nutritional products such as eggs and dairy. Yes, absolutely. Cheese.
But you know what the labelling policy should be? Don't eat anything that has a label.
Well, I mean, I think that's
Seriously,
a
you
little bit
have
simplistic
to
because we need to know
re-attack
what's
it.
in our food.
No,
Well,
we don't.
listen, the fact that we don't know what's in
No.
our food is conspicuously,
Absolutely.
patently
Yeah,
clear
yeah,
this
yes.
week with the whole horse business,
Yeah,
isn't it?
Yeah.
So how on earth, where do we, Christina, where do we start with this?
Well, I was just going to say, I used to be 14 stone 10, OK? Now, obviously, I'm tall, but it was a real problem, and I just, you know, it was horrible because you were away, looked everywhere, everyone was thin, you were told to be thinner, and, you know, everyone was telling you that you shouldn't be that size. But I was perfectly healthy, and in fact, I was trying to lose weight. Everything I did to try and lose weight didn't work. I was doing Weight Watchers and the cabbage diet and everything, just made me fatter. And I think the way to lose weight is to be happy, to be active, to be independent, to do something you love doing, and that's what happens.
To eat less?
No.
Well, it kind of happened naturally. I mean,
No.
if you,
Oliver?
Well, to eat less sugar, definitely.
Yeah, eat better.
Oliver?
So much of the scientific evidence is now moving in favour of sugar as being the really dangerous thing, and that we've been
fructose corn
wrong.
syrup.
Well, HFCS exactly as well, but that actually for a long time it was fat being demonised. You'd buy low-fat foods, as you said, full of sugar. All the evidence is now shifting away from that. Gary Taubes has written a great book called Why We Get Fat, which talks about this. And the longer we go on with it, the better. I think.
But Dr. Haboubi, you need to stress to Fatima, he says, we all are, you know, liable to get these 300 related diseases, which are particularly related, as I said in the introduction there, to
You're more
obesity.
likely if you're obese.
This is it. It is more
Absolutely.
likely to. This is the point.
That's what
I mean,
we've been
it-
hearing. In your opinion, doctor, do you think I'm thin?
Hear out the doctor. And
Right,
then we'll,
doctor,
then we'll,
yes.
then
In
we'll
the
come back.
next decade,
Yes.
there will be an increase, but 50% of type 2 diabetes, simply because there is a trend of increase in obesity. So there is a very close relationship between the two. Now,
There is a correlation. There is no correlation. I mean, there's a correlation, not causality.
No, there is.
oh yeah,
There is.
It has not been proved.
No, it hasn't.
It has not. I mean,
Are you in denial here?
I am not in
Of
denial.
the scientific
I'm
facts,
not
because
in
that's our second debate.
The science improves and changes every day. I'm talking as a fat person and who is in contact with so many other fat people. If we want a healthy nation, we have to stop this pressure on lose weight. Forget the weight. Change the paradigm from weight to health. Get people to eat healthy, to exercise,
Dr. Haboubi.
regardless of
it's
weight.
up to you. We're not talking about yourself. We're two
Dr.
issues here.
Haboubi.
We're talking about prevention.
Yes.
And we're talking about management for those who are already obese. Well, if you don't want to be treated, fine, if you're happy with what you are. But we're talking about...
You see, you're accusing me already of being diseased
But
because
it's
you
a
don't
disease.
like my size.
It's
You'd
a-
rather
sorry,
it is a
I
disease.
melt.
Wait. Is it a disease?
Of course it is.
It isn't.
Well, what do you call
It is a
epidemic?
body shape.
You don't say epidemic
It is
about something which is not
It is
a
a
disease.
body shape that has been so manipulated that it has developed into danger by yo-yo dieting. The more we diet, we lose weight and we put it back on.
Why have we
more.
got into the situation that,
There's
for
so
example...
many factors,
well, here
so
we
many
are in Cardiff, and
factors.
10 years ago, the weight of an average child in Cardiff, the average boy weighed 1.5 stone less 10 years ago than now. Why
I'll tell you
has
why.
that
Sugar.
happened?
I'll tell you.
Cheap sugar.
Coca-Cola, Pepsi Cola,
Yes,
and all
yes,
that
yes,
stuff?
Cheap sugar.
Yes.
You know, actually, I mean, studies have been done on this. Children are no more or less active now than they were in the 1960s.
Yes.
Really?
But what has happened is a plummeting of the price of sugar, largely through subsidies in American corn. And as a result, people are taking on 300 or 400 more calories 300 or 400 calories more than they used to be, and that's why the weight has ballooned, especially in young people.
Because when I was growing up, we had a glass of Coca-Cola. It was a treat.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. But now
And the
the
sizes
Coca-Cola
of
is full of sodium.
And on the government's website, it has this healthy food plate, and on it has 8% of that. It has things like cake and a cola can, and that should not be part of a healthy diet.
Here.
Yes.
Well said.
At the back, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Did you have a healthy breakfast?
I didn't have any breakfast, actually.
That's not healthy.
It's not healthy, no. I do think, though, that there's lots of factors that are contributing to this. It's like we are giving people negative images of themselves, which is not helpful, which doesn't help their mental health, which needs to be addressed as well. People sometimes don't just eat for eating's sake, but there actually is a reason behind it. Also, we're very consumerist. We want everything yesterday. So why am I going to go home and cook a healthy meal? Well, I've worked all day. I just want to get something quick, something easily accessible. And also, I think that if you tax it, I mean, alcohol is taxed, cigarettes are taxed. So if you ban it, then you just create a black market. So you need to look at the reasons why people are doing these things.
Yeah, and oh, yes, gentleman there. Good, and I'll come to you. Yeah, hi.
Yes, I was thinking to myself, I think the British public are pretty fed up with being taxed all the time, okay?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, why don't we spend some of this money onto an awareness campaign? Add some bicycle lanes into some of these areas, you know, and push this idea of a healthy lifestyle.
A healthy lifestyle, yes.
I'm just wondering how much of a difference we really think it's going to make. Things like smoking bans came into public places, but obviously with taking it off the shelves in supermarkets and then having the smoking kills signs, how much of a difference is it really going to make?
Well, we have half the smokers now than we did in the 1960s. Yeah. So smoking is unfortunately one of the arguments against the point you just made.
I think you have to look at who owns the food industry, and the pharmaceutical industry own the food industry. So the food industry want to make you sick and ill by putting all these chemicals in that rot your body and make you ill. So they then can give you tablets to make you better, which don't, because it's all about Illuminati industries making money.
All about what?
Illuminati families making money in the world.
Yes. Well,
oh, you perked up there, Rob. Illuminati families making money.
Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, to be honest.
But we gave our power away. We started not growing our own vegetables, started to give our power away to other people, saying, we'll make this food for you. You don't want to cook your own food? We'll make this for you. And then we didn't start questioning what's in this stuff. And they started putting all kinds of crap in it. I'm a raw foodist myself.
Language for a Sunday morning.
But I don't eat meat because that's pumped full of chemicals and fear. And why would you want to eat cortisol and fear and put all that in your body, and it will rot your body, make you ill?
Is there anything in this, as a food expert, anything in what she's saying about some of the chemicals that are pumped through food? We are what we eat. They're having a deleterious effect. I mean, or Dr. Haboubi or Oliver.
I mean, I think smoking is different. I mean, obviously,
we're talking about the chemicals and the cortisol, the stuff that's pumped into our meat.
I'm not vegetarian.
Well, you're a doctor, you know what cortisol does.
Yeah, I know, but the processed food is not as healthy as genuine food, for example. So we know that's a fact. The question is, I come back to this more, though a lot less people smoke nowadays, mortality.
Yeah, but it's not about, we have genetically modified seeds now by Monsanto. Monsanto are genetically modifying seeds which are patented, so you can't use the same seed next year, and that's to make money. Our bodies can't break down genetically modified vegetables. They're not even vegetables.
Yeah. Oh, well, OK, what about... Go on.
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily want to get distracted into a GM argument.
No.
That's just factually untrue that our bodies can't digest GM food.
Right. Yeah. Baroness Finlay, what about the danger that this would ultimately, actually, in the short term and mid-term, before we have this sort of culinary cultural revolution, this would be a tax on the poor?
Well, the difficulty is that the very groups where we're seeing obesity tend to be those with very low incomes, and that there is a huge cultural problem in the way that we're bringing up children, particularly rewarding children for good behaviour with sweets. They get a sugar rush, they get a bit hyperactive.
I remember
they get
going to the doctor
afterwards.
and getting a jelly baby when I was a kid at the doctor. I mean, sure. was that with us, wasn't it?
We're conditioning children to actually go for the treat foods, and we need to change the whole pattern of our eating and our respect for our local farmers. Look here in Wales, we grow fantastic vegetables, but a lot of people don't even know how to cook vegetables properly anymore, and that needs to go back into primary schools and so on, and reward good behaviours.
I just think we're failing to address the fact that actually eating more healthily is more expensive. And if you're trying to feed a family, a large family of small children, where there is hidden sugar in fast food, that's where we're going wrong. We need to address. We shouldn't tax it. We need to make it more. We need to make healthier food more available to those that are economically.
I agree with what that lady just said. Also, I think the government, rather than taxing the food, they need to further regulate the food manufacturers, because you go to the supermarket, there's hundreds of items on sale that are full of sugar, full of ingredients we can't even pronounce, that are highly addictive. And the problem with the tax is, if you tax these foods, the people who are addicted to them, they'll still buy them, regardless.
Yes. Yeah, I think coming back to what do we do, I think the focus really needs to be on prevention, and we need to start early, we need to start young. cooking should be compulsory in schools, nutrition should be compulsory in schools. As soon as a child begins to become overweight, they and their family should be given compulsory education on how to eat healthily, because unless you intervene young, that person will go on to become more and more overweight and have all the risks that are associated. And you know, the bottom line is, now, you know, you're beautiful, you're lovely, but we can't afford a world full of people who are overweight.
We have to accept that God has created people in different shapes and sizes. Why are we trying to eliminate? I mean, people get to my size because they've been trying to be your size. They've been pressured against their normal size. If I was supposed to be an 8 stone or 9 stone or 15 stone, and they tell me you're too fat, lose, I become 35 stone.
Quick word for Richard, who's a doctor. Richard.
I think the argument that people should lose weight because the health service can't afford to fund overweight people is a very dangerous argument, because I don't think it's up to the health service to decide what people should be like. It's up to the health service to provide healthcare for people who are the sort of people they want to be, they choose to be. It may well be right for us to encourage healthy eating, and I think that's very important, but I don't think...
choose to be obese.
Okay. But I think otherwise we end up saying that, therefore, we shouldn't offer orthopaedic treatment for people who choose to go skiing and break their legs. The health service is there to serve people, not the other way around.
Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you for your contributions there. And I'm sure you'd like to say something about that. Log on bbc.co.uk, the big questions. Follow the link to where you can join in online. You can join the discussion on Twitter too. And we're also debating live this morning from Cardiff, is faith compatible with reason? And is the NHS cutting lives short? So tell us what you think about those topics. Send us your ideas for future debates as well, if you will, or any general comments you'd like to make about the programme. Well, Britain's most famous atheist, Professor Richard Dawkins, said, "Faith is the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence." To St. Augustine, a founding father of Christian theology, understanding is the reward of faith. Therefore, seek not to understand that you may believe, but believe that you may understand. So is faith compatible with reason? Now, Will, you've written this really interesting book, The Heretics, Adventures with the Enemies of Science. Now, the psychology of this is really interesting, how somebody, and you deal with, with creationists and people into horoscopes and all sorts, past life regression people. We've got somebody of that ilk to talk to, I'm delighted to say, is in the studio. David Irving, the Hitler apologist. And the psychology is interesting that in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary, people will still stick to their belief and will just have this kind of filtering system in their mind. It's fascinating.
Yes. So what I discovered was that people decide what to believe with their emotions. So we are confronted by a fact, and we decide emotionally, instantaneously, whether we believe it or not. And through lots of different processes, but one of them is called confirmation bias, we will then seek evidence to justify that emotional response. And any evidence that we come across to contradict our emotional response, we'll dismiss it and distort it and say the person who's coming up with what they're saying is just an idiot. And this is how our beliefs sort of come about, and we become more and more convinced that they're right. But it all begins with feelings.
Yeah, and it's sort of the quest for certainty.
Yes. So people are very intolerant of doubt. So people will have this kind of drive to find more and more evidence to back up their beliefs.
Although doubt has arguably driven discovery in the past and driven science and driven progress,
Absolutely, and I think that, people are naturally intolerant of doubt, but we need to sort of have a bit of humility about what we believe and understand that we should always encourage that feeling of doubt.
So, past life
regression
therapy.
Most people think they know about past lives, and what I do don't unless they experience it.
No, sure, but you said I can't scientifically prove things. I just know they're true. That's what you said.
Can't scientifically prove it, but quantum physics, bizarrely, is starting to prove that the heart has a cohesive waveform. It has a pattern which is replicated, which creates emotion, and everyone's thoughts and beliefs are coming from an origin. Where do your thoughts and beliefs come from? Well, they come from 3 strains. They come from either ancestral patterns, which are passed down through ancestors, which we call genetic, which I also work with when I regress people to change what's programmed in their subconscious, not the conscious mind, but the subconscious. And then you have past life patterns, and then you have compounded stuff from being in the womb to present day, because you have consciousness in the womb. And this creates your current reality. Even weight is an issue of a slowed metabolism coming from programming from either past lives or ancestors. That's why it's genetic. A lot of people in your family might be overweight. When you clear the emotional reason running on a subconscious level, because the conscious self is going, no, I've no issues, but the subconscious is running another story.
So what's your external proof then? I mean, how
external proof is clients, people who've experienced it, and they change their reality, they change their experience. I don't deny your reality exists, that person's reality. All realities exist, but they exist within different dimensions. We live in a multi-dimensional reality. We live in a holographic universe.
But couldn't you just
we live in a what?
A holographic universe.
Babble.
But couldn't
What? Sorry?
Babble.
Your free will to believe it's babble, it's free will.
I think one of the reasons why a lot of people here probably haven't heard of past life regression is that there's no scientific basis.
Yeah, it's been given a bad
The burden of proof rests with you. You need to prove what you've just said.
I proved myself. I've done this on TV. I used to have my own show on ITV. I proved it. By Derek Brown.
Let's listen to Rob, because Rob, the point you make is kind of a theory attains the status of scientific theory, and if anything disproves it or successfully refutes it, it is no longer a theory. Right.
Yeah, basically, at the outset, you said your heart tells you that this is true.
Yeah, I feel what I feel is
Can I remind you, your heart isn't the organ that allows you to think and reason.
It does. Heart has an intelligence, and science is proving that now.
Reason is based on empirical evidence that is testable, falsifiable, and
that is Newtonian.
verifiable.
That's
and you're not
Newtonian,
able to do
Cartesian
that.
thinking.
Did you interrupt in a previous life as well?
I did. I love interrupting.
Just let Rob finish. Go on, Rob.
No, that's all I have to say. The burden of proof rests with you. You can't provide the evidence.
I can provide
It's such
the
a
evidence.
dangerous way to look at life.
Dangerous.
You
There's nothing dangerous,
you can justify anything, a belief in anything.
Anybody's
with faith.
experience is their reality. Everybody's experience is their reality. If someone's life is improved by the work I do, or someone else does similar to what I do, then you can't deny it, and they heal disease and illness.
Okay, wait. I mean, Christina, you're a physicist, but also a Christian, but you see great proof of God in physics, don't you? And in the world around you. Although some would say that as those mysteries are unravelled, as we progress scientifically and we discover more and more, some argue there's less of a space for God. But the rainbow is a good example. Oh, God did it. Well, now we know how rainbows through the refraction of light work. So it's the idea of the God of the gaps. Those gaps get smaller and smaller.
Okay. Right. So if I can just sort of set the background here. So let's think about faith generally, right? If we just think about faith in human life. So hopefully husbands have faith in their wives, vice versa. Okay, so that's based on past experience, but you don't know that your spouse is going to be faithful in the future. So you're taking something from the past, which is rational, reasonable, you know, based on the observation of this person as you're courting, and then at some point, one of you decides, or both decide at the same time, you want to get married. Once you're married, then you have told each other you will try and stay together. You have faith that this person will be steady, kind, faithful, and you have to keep going. At some point, you might start thinking, is he seeing someone else, for example? And then you can either say, well, I'll trust in him a bit longer until it's absolutely obvious that he's being unfaithful, or you could start setting...
but it's falsifiable, it's scientific. You can get a private detective to find out.
Right. But there is still an element of taking what you know to be true and applying that to the future, which you don't actually know. Right? So other examples are orchestras and their conductors. So the conductor has to take the orchestra through a series of rehearsals. You have to have faith that the conductor is going to rehearse you enough in the different places.
Oh, okay. So far?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's interesting. So we were talking about past life regression, which I have experienced. And you say, you know it in your heart that it's real. And I think it's the same with Christians. I mean, Christians begin with an extremely powerful emotional conviction that God is real. But of course, we don't know that God is real until you've actually been in a room with God and shaken his hand. You don't know that it's real.
Absolutely.
It begins with a feeling, and the source of your feelings is your brain, it's your mind. It's not anything out there. We're all the same. And I'm no more rational in lots of ways than you. I'm not saying that I'm Mr. Perfect. We all have these. We all begin with these feelings, but these feelings aren't to be trusted.
Well, I would say
why aren't these feelings to be trusted?
Because emotions, you know, we all live in that kind of... we all tell ourselves stories about the world, and these stories are very emotional. They're full of people who hate us and love us, and they're good guys and bad. And that's how, you know, the brain is like a story-generating organism. It's not a fact-generating organism. So and we become vulnerable to these narratives we tell of the world. And... as I say, they lead us down these sort of very distorted passages in terms of what we should and shouldn't believe.
Well, it's not about should and shouldn't. I mean, God's... OK, there is obviously a difference. I mean, clearly, God is invisible. You know, we don't wake up and this huge sort of face of God smiling down at us from the sky. Now, is that deliberate? I mean, is God perhaps setting us up... If you think about the story of Beauty and the Beast, so Beauty wakes up... I can't remember the story, but she wakes up, there's this bit... And everything's provided for. There's this sort of sumptuous mansion. She can't see who's in charge. It's the Beast, obviously. And she gets to know his character through what he's providing for her, so that when they meet, she understands his actual kindness rather than just judging him from appearance. Okay.
With respect, what we're seeing here is confirmation bias in action. So, you know, you're an intelligent person, you have this belief in God, but there's a problem. Where is God? I can't see him. So now we're actually watching you doing it. So how can we explain this? How can we think our way around this?
I think your book sounds really, really interesting, and I'm looking forward to reading it. And you're absolutely right about confirmation bias, but the point about reason is that a belief in reason or a belief in the value of reason encourages you to advance hypotheses, to test them, to reach conclusions, and constantly to test those conclusions.
Challenge theories when those hypotheses become theories.
Faith does the absolute reverse. It begins with the conclusion and rejects evidence that doesn't fit with it.
OK, that's not true. That's not true.
Julia.
Many people come to faith through an intellectual understanding. They look at the evidence, historical, anthropological, archaeological, you know, the writers at the time, and the verification, and that's what brings them to faith. It's the intellectual evidence base for faith that then is confirmed by existential experience.
Intellectual, OK, let's just take that. That's
just
good.
A feeling.
Intellectual evidence base confirmed by existential experience.
Sounds a bit of a spurious term, to be honest, because every discovery that's ever been made by science has excluded a supernatural constituent in that explanation.
Yeah. So well, that's the God of the gaps idea, isn't it?
It's the God of the gaps, and basically I think you've been more than optimistic if you think that any scientific discoveries in the future will contain...
What about the human mind, consciousness, which seems to exceed the sum of the parts? We do not have an understanding of the human mind, of human consciousness, do we?
No, not
so
yet.
You're not there yet, are you?
No,
There's still a big gap, isn't
however, I would even go and say, even if we could never understand human consciousness, I still think the most implausible explanation for consciousness is an invisible man in the sky. Put it there.
And also...
There's going to be a scientific explanation in the future.
And also... One second. More from the Three Wise Monkeys in just a second.
I don't think it's an... Why do we keep saying it's a man? Why can source, which is just life force energy, be male or female? Why can it not be both, you know? And also...
I don't want you two to fall out with each other.
We have the conscious self and we have the subconscious self, and the subconscious self is running your... fight or flight reactions
that comes
to what
from within.
You do.
It's not driven by an external
by your past
force.
life programming.
No, it's not driven by an external force.
No,
humanity and understanding consciousness comes from within us.
Life is from in with you. There's nothing out there. It's inside you.
I would say
John Paul II said, faith and reason, I'll put this to you, Oliver, faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth.
Well, I mean, I've used the word again.
Discuss.
It's complete babble. Martin Luther was much closer to the mark when he said that reason was the greatest enemy a Christian faced, and that Christians should pluck out the eye of reason. Of course, the tragedy of that quotation is that he recognised that reason was a way of seeing things.
Do you think that anyone there in this studio, for example, watching at home, who has faith is being illogical?
I think it's difficult. I think people who have faith can begin from a position that says faith is the primal thing, the most important thing, and then they can reason within that. But I've argued before, I just argued that actually faith and reason are diametrically opposed, because one starts with a conclusion and one starts with a premise.
The greatest mathematician who ever lived, Sir Isaac Newton, said just a thumbprint alone, and the fact there are no two thumbprints in the world that are identical, is enough to persuade him for there to be a creator God. Because the probability is so infinitesimal for just that one fact. That's what led him into his...
Newton
But some of the world's leading evolutionary biologists are Christians. You know, Ayala and Ken Miller and Watson. You know, they see wonderful things in, for example, the natural processes of evolution. It's not exclusive, and it was Stephen Jay Gould who spoke of the non-overlapping magisteria of science and faith. They are compatible, they work together. It's like the idea of the wings. You don't buy that?
No, I don't. I think it's very difficult for me to reconcile evolution and faith, because we now have to believe that God sort of twiddled his thumbs for billions of years waiting for evolution to deliver the human masterpiece. The reason why evolution has been accepted by faith is because of the dwindling intellectual integrity of religion. They've been forced to sort of offer...
The Church of England accepts it, the Catholic Church accepts it, most mainstream religions accept it.
The evidence is
it was
so strong.
a debate we did a few weeks ago, very interesting, about religion. So it's not just evolution, there are other aspects of science as well, aren't there?
Indeed, yeah. I think it's just clutching at straws. I think it's having your cake and eating it, to be honest, because it doesn't stack up to sort of tally the two. But it's just a means to sort of, as all of us said, it's just to start with that truth. There must be a God. We must find a way to link that evidence back to God.
Yeah,
and it doesn't stack up.
Yeah, but OK, it's not just the natural world. I mean, for a start, we've got people claim, well, Jesus came 2,000 years ago, and the idea is that he was actually God in human form, showing us what God was like.
So do you think if he'd had a DNA test, half of his DNA would have been untraceable?
I don't know.
Because half came from his mother.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Yeah, scientifically.
I don't know.
It was all divine.
So all his DNA was... No, half your DNA is from your mother, half's from your father.
But it might not have been, I guess.
But it was immaculate conception. It's all divine. It's just that she carried the baby.
Right.
Yeah, we don't know, do we?
Right.
I mean...
What if we are all God and the goddess?
Good.
What if I love all the prophets equally? I think they're all fabulous. But Buddha, Muhammad, Jesus, Allah, they're all right. But we, man, have distorted it to beseech this external deity, which isn't true.
Yeah, you like that. Yes, sir. What would you like to say?
I think we were starting from the wrong point. In terms of faith and how faith is defined, is based on conjecture, based on doubt. This is a general definition. From an Islamic perspective, the definition of faith or belief is what convinces the mind, then settles in the heart, and is followed then in the action. So the point I'm making, the way to belief is intellectual. It's an intellectual journey. And what you find, when you're talking about reason and ration, particularly using reality, you will find that actually that this is very compatible with religion. In fact, it actually leads you to belief of the Creator. Another point that's been made, we keep talking about gods and almost in a sort of the human form, whereas first we should be looking at the Creator and starting from that premise, coming to the point of a Creator that is eternal and that everything is limited and dependent on the Creator.
Rather than an anthropocentric God.
This gentleman has just described confirmation bias. Again, it begins in the heart and then we go on a journey. The problem with that journey is it's a distorted journey.
But the thing about the Quran is the Quran has some very strong edicts within it and recommendations to seek knowledge.
Yes,
and to...
yes, but the problem is with that, we feel as if we're seeking knowledge. This has been demonstrated, this is confirmation. So we feel as if we're having a rational, reasonable exploration of the facts, but we're not. We're just confirming what the heart has told us in the first place. That's the problem with faith.
And that's why all realities exist.
Sorry. No, in science, the same thing happens. I'm sorry. But, scientists has a hypothesis. It might be a PhD student that's given an idea by a supervisor, and he says, right, go away and see if this is true. Right, so you start with a premise. And I think with God, it is a bit impossible to extrapolate and find out what God is just from reason alone. I think God has to come as Jesus, as the Holy Spirit in our lives, and so on. But does that mean it's not true?
I agree to an extent that of course, scientists aren't free of these problems as well. But the scientific method is the method by which we've come across to actually destroy the processes of confirmation bias, destroy anecdote, destroy emotion. It's not a perfect system, and you're still going to get very eminent scientists completely disagreeing on what the data says. But it's a brilliant and largely successful attempt.
When Einstein's theory of relativity came along, everyone had to think again, and everything changed. Wasn't it all? Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you for that. We're all God. That's the message we take from it. And have you got something to say about that debate, log on bbc.co.uk/thebigquestions. Follow the link to the online discussion. Send us your views about our last big question. Is the NHS cutting lives short? And if you'd like to be in an audience and come here for a future show, you can email audience@mentron.tv. We're in Northolt next week, in London. We're in Southampton on February the 24th. We're in St Albans on March the 3rd. Well, most of us prefer not to think too much about dying. It's not really something you can plan for, but we all hope for a good death, pain-free, surrounded by our loved ones at home and in peace. But more than half of us will die on a busy hospital ward, and that's why the Liverpool Care Pathway was developed to try and make each of those deaths as pain-free and peaceful as possible. As some families and doctors now fear that putting a patient on the Liverpool Care Pathway has itself become a death sentence, ruling out the chance of recovery. Is the NHS cutting lives short? Dr. Philip Howard, there's been a kind of quite a media furore about this. Some think a media hysteria about it. The Daily Mail has been talking about it a lot. It's not about not prolonging a life. It's about not prolonging a life unnecessarily, isn't it? I mean, do you approve in principle of the Liverpool Care Pathway?
I think one of the problems with the Liverpool Care Pathway is it's predicated on a false premise, namely that you can accurately diagnose death. You can make an accurate prognosis as to when a person is going to die within the next few hours or days. And there's no scientific evidence that we can do that. And I know of no calibration tools that we can use to say just how accurately we can make that prognosis. That's the danger. Now, if you then sedate the patient, stop observations, stop interventions, and stop food and fluids, the patient must die.
Yeah.
Whether or not they would have died anyway, they must die if you adopt that regime in full.
Yeah, Baroness Finlay, can we have full confidence that, given the perceived crisis in care, it's been a very difficult week for the NHS, that this has been ethically and appropriately applied?
Can I pick up the point, first of all, about prognosis?
Please do.
Because the Royal College of GPs, in evidence to a select committee I was on, said, and I quote, it's possible to make reasonably accurate prognoses of death within minutes, hours, or a few days. When this stretches to months, then the scope for error can extend into years. The thing is that there is no absolute way of predicting what's going to happen anywhere. It's on probabilities. Now, when somebody looks as if they're dying and you have done all you can to exclude all reversible causes, then whatever you do, you must go back and review and review and review. Good medicine is based on evidence, on going back and analysing what you see before you.
But what about a junior doctor, a weekend staffing, a busy ward? You know, if it's in the hands of good people who are not under pressure, who are not stressed, fine. But is that always the case?
I certainly think that the evidence that's been coming forward, let's look at evidence, is that there seems to have been a problem in some cases, and there is now an inquiry set up under Baroness Neuberger. I think that she needs to be able to access all the evidence, she needs to be able to look at all the cases, and she needs to be able to conduct her inquiry independently, impartially, and look at where the problems lie, where there are problems, and, much more importantly, too, is what the solutions to those problems
see, this
are.
is for people hearing at home, if there's a problem with the application, that's... Jackie, what...
We would argue, of course, there's a case for high-quality palliative care in hospices and in the home, but when that's rolled out indiscriminately in the NHS, it becomes very, very dangerous. My father was admitted to hospital on a Friday evening, parked on a ward all weekend. We begged them to do a CT scan. They kept saying, oh, we'll have to see, we'll have to see, we'll have to see. We got the consultant brought down to his bed. She still refused to do a CT scan. On the Tuesday morning, they called us in, oh, too late now, he's too poorly. We were given a definitive diagnosis of perforation. We said, how can you say that based on inconclusive x-rays? Oh, we're sure it's a perforation. He was put on the Liverpool care pathway and died. At post-mortem, it was found that he actually had pulmonary embolisms,
So
which
misdiagnosis.
could have... Yeah, it was a total misdiagnosis. But the reason we're here is because elderly care in the NHS is appalling.
Can I say, firstly, I'm not here to defend the whole NHS. I don't know the ins and outs of the tragedy of your father's case.
Exactly.
But, and I'm not going, can't comment on that, but there certainly would appear to have been a misdiagnosis. The difficulty in this discussion is, did the Liverpool care pathway itself prevent people reviewing that diagnosis, or was the failure at a different point earlier and a failure of care?
The problem is, it wasn't just a misdiagnosis. The fact is, they didn't do any investigation into what he had. So, unfortunately, a system like this, with the best intention in the world, people fall through the cracks like our granddad. And even if one person falls through the cracks, for me, that is wrong.
I would certainly not condone anyone falling through the cracks. The whole of the work
so
that we do
that was my
is to
first
drive
question,
up
wasn't
care.
it? Given you know, the current problems, current stresses, current pressures, future pressures, reorganisation,
Yes.
do you have the utmost, as much as you can, confidence that this is being appropriately and ethically and responsibly applied?
Of course, I couldn't say that I have 100% confidence. We have an inquiry. I've been arguing for an inquiry. I've supported the setting up of an inquiry, and we need to have it. It needs to go and look in detail. Is the problem with the documentation itself? Is the problem with the way that it's been rolled out? Is the problem with what's happening actually at the bedside?
Financial incentives. Hospitals have been paid... We saw last week with the Francis inquiry about the problem about target-driven NHS. Financial incentives have been paid to hospitals. Certain hospitals that are now being investigated for their mortality rates...
30 million.
One hospital was paid £308,000 for reaching targets for putting people on what is basically a euthanasia programme. Baroness, it is euthanasia.
Euthanasia is about intent. The Liverpool care pathway doesn't intend to kill people. It intends to improve the care when people are inevitably dying. That's quite different.
But it doesn't work in practice.
Jackie, you in your interview with the Gazette, you finished your interview with very perceptive.
For the rest of us?
It was your local Gazette.
Okay, well, don't mention the local Gazette.
You made the point. You said it's not that the Liverpool care pathway is bad in itself. It's that it can be badly used. I'm paraphrasing, but that was the...
That's right, it's abused in the NHS.
And I think that's the distinction we need
so Richard, this is
to make.
So the principle of it is... It's
the
a good principle.
The principle is that there is a point in the life of a patient when we know when they are going to die. We may not know it with absolute certainty. We've already talked about how human beings find certainty desirable, but we can't always have it. If we wait until we are certain, we've missed the chance to care for them over that time.
So it's about not prolonging a life unnecessarily.
Neither prolonging nor hastening it.
Not hastening. Dr. Haboubi.
I'm a physician, and I look after acutely ill people, and we do occasionally put patients, and this is not frequent, you must understand that, on the care pathway. We agonize on this decision. We consult these nurses, junior, senior doctors.
Family.
Looking at the family, of course. You can't put a patient on a care pathway unless you consult the family.
And yet that is often done.
No, very often there's no consent given.
Were you consulted?
We were told that it was inoperable, and that was what they were going to do. Beforehand, we were fighting for investigations
their
to
analysis,
be taken.
their diagnosis.
Well, we didn't know, but what could we do? Dial 999 and call the police? But I know a lot of people who weren't consulted. Their consent wasn't sought from the relatives, consent wasn't sought from the patients.
That is absolutely wrong and was not behind the development of the Liverpool Care Pathway, which was developed at Liverpool with Marie Curie cancer. It was very much about having the conversation around dying well. And just as an expectant mother has a birth plan, we should all expect to have a death plan, how we want to die, where we want to die, what kind of interventions, and to not have that conversation was absolutely wrong, and you were betrayed in that. I just want to come to another point about the financial incentives. I think it's totally wrong that hospitals are paid to put people on this pathway. The money should go into training palliative care professionals, and it should also, as we've heard with the Francis report, and one of the first suggestions is that we need many more professionals who are trained in care for older people.
Is this another example of the target-driven culture, Baroness Finlay? Well, Richard, yeah, I see you nodding vigorously.
I think there's a real danger in trying to put simplistic targets around healthcare, which is incredibly complex.
And nuanced.
The absolute critical thing is that whenever you've got a patient in front of you, you must go back and review. You must rethink, were you right? Is there something else going on? Is there actually something reversible?
So, yeah, that's it. So, Richard, how often, and I know this is an interest area of yours, how often, once somebody's on the Liverpool Care Pathway, has somebody been taken off it because signs of recovery have been
so I need to be clear. I do paediatric palliative care, and we don't use the Liverpool Care Pathway in children. But in the principle you're asking, how often do we go back and review? We're reviewing all the time. Every minute of every day, we would see a patient every day, and I think this issue of it's not so much a question of consent to go on the pathway, it's the fact that the conversation needs to take place. It was designed to facilitate that kind of communication, not to replace it. And I think it goes back, if I may say so, to an earlier comment, because it's about the individuality of the patient that we're dealing with, rather than the NHS trying to shape itself through defining targets.
Can I just say, when you go back and review, about 3% of times you find that actually you were wrong. The person isn't dying, they've improved because you've stopped whatever treatments you were doing that were making them worse than they felt, because that's the nature of medicine.
Philip Howard, is this the case? Is it under constant review once somebody's on the pathway?
One of the problems about the Liverpool Care Pathway is the decisions made, and then very often observations are stopped, nursing observations are stopped, simple blood tests are stopped, and further interventions are usually stopped. With the exception of oxygen, interesting, that's continued in 45% of cases. But most other interventions are stopped and very rarely started. How can the patient be properly reviewed if you don't have basic nurse observations, basic blood tests and so on? After 3 days, 3/4 of the patients have died. But of those that are still alive, according to the audit that was done of 7,000 patients 2 years ago, only 20% were reassessed.
A lady, you put your hand up a few minutes ago. I don't know if your point's still relevant, but please make it. Mona.
What's particularly worrying that the vulnerable are the ones who are in most danger. How about the people who don't have families? Who also may not be in the right mental capacity to understand what is happening around them. Yet again, we are seeing in this society that the most vulnerable are being put in at risk, from winter fuel payments wanting to be cut down, bedroom tax. Yet again, we are targeting the vulnerable, and I think that this Liverpool Care Pathway shouldn't be allowed if you can't 100% guarantee that there aren't risks like this happening.
The people I know who've come off the pathway have had families who've been strong enough and confident enough to defy the doctors and nurses. An old gentleman we know, after 3 days, he said, "That's it, I'm feeding my dad. I'm giving him some porridge, I'm giving him a drink." That old man, at 91 years of age, went home from hospital on Friday. But if his son hadn't had the guts to stand up to the doctors and nurses, he would be dead by now.
So, Richard,
and that's what's happening today in the NHS, not in hospices.
Is there a danger, then, that it becomes a matter of resources?
There is a danger, but that's a misapplication of a good pathway rather than because the pathway itself is wrong.
Extol the virtues of the pathway for anyone listening and thinking, oh my goodness.
Because I think it's more difficult for doctors to do nothing than it is for them to do something. And there are times when to do nothing interventionist is the right thing to do for people. And they need some help in doing that nothing and doing it well. And the Liverpool Care Pathway provides the support for them to make those good decisions. That doesn't mean that it's always implemented properly, and I think what we've heard are a number of examples where it has been implemented poorly.
The paperwork is sloppy. It just has to be signed by one doctor and a nurse. My father's paperwork's sloppy. The space for diagnosis is tiny.
Lady there, good morning.
Can I just speak up for doctors and nurses? Because any doctor and nurses that I've ever met in the NHS, they're not angels of death that I feel people are painting them out to be here. They care very much and they do have the patient's best interest at heart from my experiences.
Yeah.
I think it's with death. It's just that people don't want to acknowledge it might be happening now, and they might actually be on their way out. So I think there is an aspect where we maybe we're so afraid of death that we're sort of fighting frantically, and then there's the other side of it where we just view this patient I know as just get them out, you know. So certainly I had my father's cousin who's got Alzheimer's very, very badly, and I meant to go and see her for years and years and years, and then about 2 weeks ago I went to see her, and she was in a really, comatose state, in the bed, all scrunched up. And she was my father's cousin, and I was so glad to see her. And, she had Alzheimer's, but she recognised, well, not my name or her husband's name, but she did know her sister's name and her cousin's name. And we did have this conversation. I was going to say, thank you for everything you've done in the past. And I think maybe doctors have just got to remember that these people are grandparents, aunts, uncles, and it's this huge human thing about seeing people and not sort of either cutting it short or dragging it out, as you say, but just it's a human institution. It's not an institution. It's a really important event.
And that, Philip, in the vast majority of cases, is what happens, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I think it's a pity that we've had palliative care in this country for 35 to 40 years. We pioneered good care for the dying in this country through the hospice movement. That was a quiet revolution in medicine, and we're very proud of it, and it is still applied widely. I think the tragedy is that we've got a problem. We never had this sort of controversy that we're seeing with the Liverpool Care Pathway over the hospice movement. Walk down any high street and you will see charity shops for hospices. There's a tremendous amount of support, and rightly, in this country for the hospice movement, for hospices, for good care. And I entirely agree with Baroness Finlay that we must have a proper review of this. It is quite clear that there is a genuine concern about the way palliative care is happening in this country, and it is going to have to be a proper and thoroughgoing investigation as to what's going on. And the sense that I get from relatives, and Jackie has just illustrated this very nicely, is that relatives and the public at large want good palliative care. Everybody is pushing from the same side. They want doctors and nurses and the system to work well for those that are dying. And that must happen.
I guess you've only got a few seconds,
Okay.
but this has been in place for quite some time, hasn't it?
Right. If I may pick up on the comment that was made, actually doctors and nurses, by and large, desperately want to do what's right by their patient. They don't get it right all the time. We've been trying to drive up standards of care. We just have to be careful we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
And that continues. Thank you all very much for taking part. We'll see you next week in Northolt. Have a great Sunday.